All right. Well, welcome, Arthur, founder of Lambs. It's good to have you, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about your company and EMF. So glad to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Amber. Super pumped to be here.
Absolutely. So I first heard about Lambs. Somebody had reached out to me from the company about using some of the gear. So I recently had an opportunity to wear the hat when I work out, and I wear the shirt at night, notice a better sleep. So I just want to hear more from your side of what were the origins of this company? I know EMF is a really big conversation right now, and just share with us more about how the company got started.
Yeah. So Lambs is the world's first radiation-proof apparel, and the way we started, a new type of products completely, kind of traces back to my to my teens. So I've been I've had this kind of like problem-solving mindset most of my youth. I ended up training as an engineer in the biology field later. Because I became passionate very early on with human health, and especially realizing that the choices that I was making today would have a massive compounding effect on my likelihood of developing diseases in the long run, especially for most of modern diseases that are plaguing us, like cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. They all have their roots like much earlier on, and the environmental factors, obviously there are some genetics factors to it, but the environmental factors, I mean, I can't control the genetics, but I can definitely control a lot more of my environment. And so embarked on this health improvement or health maintenance journey in my early teens. And so obviously EMFs have been on my radar for pretty early on, but I never really did anything about it, because what are you going to do? Like, I'm Gen Y. I'm born essentially with this technology, or grew up with technology, and so I can't find my way around Los Angeles without my without Google Maps and, and all of this. So yeah, never did anything about it because I figured, well, that's one of the factors that I can't control. Until one day we're at dinner with friends, and we all had this reflex of taking our cell phones out of our pockets and putting it on the table. And we started discussing the fact that, yeah, we had all heard about the fact that we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be carrying our cell phones in our pockets. Yeah, wireless radiation from Wi-Fi are bad for our health. And yet we're sitting in this room with like all of us have our cell phones in our pockets. There is definitely a ton of Wi-Fi around us. We have like fitness trackers and so on and so forth. And so we're like, and that's the moment where I was like, okay, well, that's definitely a problem that a lot of people are exposed to, and obviously, I mean, the entire population is exposed to this. And I started researching more into what is the actual problem with wireless radiation with EMF. And the first resource that I found was the World Health Organization website categorizing EMFs as a class 2B human carcinogen, which is the same categorization as car exhaust fumes. And I remember back then doing this research in my small student bedroom, which would barely fit a car, but that was my haha moment where I was like, well, if a car was running in this room right now, I'd not be staying there. I'd get out. And yet we're essentially bathing in wireless radiation all day long. And that's the moment where I was like, well, I should try and create a solution. And so fast forward a few years, and here is the solution, Lambs. So we created technology that blocks 99.9% of wireless radiation coming from your cell phone, your Wi-Fi, Bluetooth connected devices, and so on and so forth. That is directly integrated within garments. And that way we can protect our bodies without changing any of our habits and keep on using all the amazing technology that makes our modern world a lot easier to live in than than a few years ago.
Yeah, tremendous. Yeah, you really uh, answered a problem, solved a problem for so many people, a problem that many people probably don't even know exists.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Like when we got, there has been a massive difference between when we first got started about people being like, what is wireless radiation, and now where there is a lot more awareness, especially with laws being passed in different countries. Obviously, 5G being rolled out brought back the topic of like, well, how safe is it for our health, and and the reality of it is we're not going to stop technology from becoming more and more important, and technology is not necessarily a bad thing either. Like, I mean, there are lots of amazing things that come out of this, especially in medicine field and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that with every new invention that we shouldn't be taking measures to, make sure that it doesn't impact our health. And so it's always a double-edged sword when there is innovation somewhere. And so with Lambs, we set out essentially to be like, well, we don't want to be going and living off the woods or burning towers or any of this, but at the same time, we do care about our long-term health and short-term as well. We're seeing, you were talking about your sleep. That's one of the benefits that a lot of people wearing Lambs are reporting, is better sleeps for reasons that we can discuss afterwards. But there is immediate health effects that are being observed by wearing Lambs, because it removes one of the environmental stressor that is impacting your cells and your body.
Yeah, tremendous. I truly, I think you are forward thinking, and your company is forward thinking in this sense. And I tell my patients this often: is we live in the most toxic world ever. We have more environmental exposures, EMF being one of them, that most people completely don't even think about in their daily life. But we need to have strategies on board to protect our bodies from our environment, and not to be in a fear state all the time of I can't see my environment. Not to put people in this kind of anxious, obsessive place, but just to be aware of how they can really set themselves up for health. And this is one thing
100%.
that you're providing.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on what you just said about like living in a fear mode all the time. This is actually something that with Lambs we're really went the opposite way of like, well, it's a set it and forget it, and then you don't have to think about EMFs ever again as long as you're protected. It's kind of like installing a water filter at home. It's like you have a ton of water pollution, PFAS, et cetera, et cetera. So the water from your tap is usually not as good as you think it'd be. And then you install a water filter and you don't have to think about it anymore. Just filter your water. That's it, done. So
yeah, those passive things I think are really powerful, right? So I
right,
think about red light therapy, water filtration, the Lambs. It's just you set it, forget it, put it on. You have it a part of your protocol, and you don't have to think about it.
100%. And this is kind of in my own health journey. That's what I've always been about, is like trying to find these little solutions, these little nuggets that I can implement and that will compound over time as well. So that like 20, 30 years from now, having removed this for so long, hopefully, I mean, you'll never know what would have happened otherwise, but I'd rather not know.
Me neither. Yeah. So I love it. So let's talk more about the potential downfalls, what we know EMF can do to the body, to the brain, to the mitochondria, to fertility, to hormones, all of these potential downsides. And then we'll talk more about the technology and what we can do to protect ourselves from it. So tell us more about the dangers of EMF.
Yeah. So there's been a ton of studies first done on the short to long-term effect of EMS without looking at the root cause of why. And I'll get to the root cause right after, because I always find it interesting to start this way, which is, so what have studies shown that EMF can damage in our body or increases our risks of developing long-term? The first thing that was studied was cancer. Started up in the 90s with the first user-reported brain cancer from right next to the ear where that person was spending a ton of time on the phone. And there's been a number of studies that are showing that there is an increase in the risk of developing tumors, especially brain tumors and breast cancer when being exposed to wireless radiation. Studies then looked at fertility, and especially male fertility. There's been a few on female fertility too. And one of the most well-known studies from the Cleveland Clinic, where they found that men keeping their cell phones in their pockets for more than 4 hours per day were experiencing a 50% reduction in sperm count, as well as a reduction in sperm quality factors such as morphology, speed, DNA, and lifespan of the sperm itself. And more recently, we found that it can also have an impact on gut health, on cardiovascular health, and risks of developing neurological disorders as well. And on top of this, you have some people that report feeling brain fog, as well as attention problem when exposed to more EMFs than other. And so that's, like, having said that, it sounds like, okay, well, so it's responsible for everything. And it's it's not exactly right to look at it this way. So now to get into the nitty-gritty of like how are EMFs impacting our bodies. In a nutshell, what happens is exposure to wireless radiation is an environmental stressor that increases the risk. It increases our chances of our body being in a state of oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is a state of imbalance between free radicals that are kind of attacking your body and antioxidants, which are fighting off free radicals. When you have more free radicals than antioxidants can cope with, you're entering a state of stress, which is called oxidative stress. And the best example of oxidative stress that anyone can test at home is just cutting an apple, leaving it on the counter, and looking at this apple that you've left on the counter becoming brown. That's oxidation, and this oxidation is destroying the tissue of the apple. And when in a state of oxidative stress, that's what's happening in our cells and in our tissues. And oxidative stress is one of the root causes of all these ailments that we've discussed before, such as cancer, such as cardiovascular diseases, et cetera, et cetera. It's not the only one, but it's a state of inflammation that can that drastically increases the risk of developing one of these diseases in the long term or in the short term, depending on what we're looking at. And that's why there are so many risks associated with wireless radiation, because it stems from this. And wireless radiation is not the only thing that can increase oxidative stress. Poor diet is one of them. If you're eating burgers and fries every day, you can be sure that you're going to increase your risk of all of these that we've just discussed. It's not just like you're going to become obese and have heart disease. You're likely also to have increases risk of cancer and so on and so forth. Poor sleep is another one. And no exercise is yet another one. So there are multiple factors that can increase oxidative stress, and wireless radiation is a big factor. So if you're interested, we can get into the details of why wireless radiation increase oxidative stress. I don't know if you want to go down the rabbit hole or not.
Yeah, I would say I agree. Everything you said was really, really helpful. I love your model of explaining oxidative stress and what's happening in the cell. And really, what I think about being hijacked is that mitochondria. So it's that the
Yes.
energy that's produced in the cell, and we know that we're actually human batteries, right? And so we have an electrical charge that's in our cells, and the EMF can potentially interfere with that. Specifically that energy production in the cell. And so, it's interesting when 5G rolled out, and I live in Los Angeles, and in a big city, you have more exposure than most places because I live so close to everybody. There's Wi-Fi cables or Wi-Fi signals everywhere. And what's the implications? Well, we know that there's a lot of mitochondria in the nervous tissue and the muscle tissue, and so more headaches, more brain fog, more fatigue manifesting potentially as a result. And just like you mentioned, it's not just the EMF. There's also lots of other lifestyle factors, but you add up
Yeah,
multiple different stressors, and that's when you really compound a problem with a lot of symptoms that turns into a diagnosis. So that's where this really is pivotal for prevention.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mitochondria, it's interesting what you said about the mitochondria. So if we're looking at the mechanism of harm of EMFs, what happens is it starts with calcium, which is one of the key messengers in our bodies. The exposure to wireless radiation activate what's called calcium-gated, voltage-gated calcium channels, which creates an influx of calcium ions in our cells and our mitochondria. That triggers a cascade of reactions that end up with peroxynitrate, which is one of the most damaging molecules that we can have in our body, because it can travel throughout the membranes, including your nucleus membrane, where your DNA is protected. This peroxynitrate is then being broken down into free radicals, which we've just said like can attack your body and create this state of oxidative stress and damage your DNA, damage your cell, damage your proteins, your lipids, etc. What happens if you damage your DNA? If you're damaging your DNA, is we have repair mechanisms that can be triggered in order to repair this DNA. That happens all the time. But this repair mechanism use up ATP, which is the battery that which is the molecule that can be considered energy in our bodies. And by using up more ATP, it's not unlimited. At some stage, our body can only produce so much of it. So by having this state of oxidative stress, by having this damage is done to our DNA on a more frequent basis, the rest of the body cannot perform as optimally because now it's lacking ATP. It's kind of like looking at a good analogy is probably looking at a village which can cope with one fire, it can cope with two fires, it can even probably cope with like a ton of fires all around, but then it's not tending its field, then the the houses are half destroyed, and the body functions are not, the village functions are not being optimally taken care of. And that's the same thing that happens with oxidative stress and with damages in the body when resources are redirected towards fixing these damages when the body can.
Yeah. The other thing about the mitochondria is they also, in their own natural production of energy, create oxidative stress. So
Yep.
not in addition to that, we have all of the environmental exposures. So we really have to be on top of this, essentially, setting that all of those exposures or reducing those that we can. So yeah, and how many people do you find that, they place their phone right on their, they have those armbands right here. The phone is right up next to the head when they're talking on the phone, and some of those exposures, what is it really doing to those tissues? So can you walk us through, I think we really covered talking about some of the systemic effects, the reproductive effects, poor fertility, drop in testosterone levels that we can see. There's a lot of data that's been shown from the impacts of EMF. Can you talk us through more about the technology? So how do we protect ourselves? Let's go into more action there.
Yeah. So right before we talk about the technology, I think one thing that is important to understand is what are EMFs? What are wireless radiation, and why do they exist, right? So wireless radiation are frequencies that are being used specifically in consumer devices to exchange information. And so the reason why your cell phone emits radiation and cell phone towers emit radiation is because they're communicating with one another through these invisible waves that are everywhere. And same for your computer and Wi-Fi, same from any connected devices that you may be wearing. They all exchange information with the devices or that they're connected with, or the internet or the cell phone network that they're connected with. So we can't remove EMF from devices themselves, or we're canceling completely the utility of your cell phone. So if we were to say, okay, well, let's make a cell phone without radiation, that's great. It's called an iPod or whatever we had back in the days, but it's not going to be connected to the internet. It's not going to make calls, and it's not going to send texts. And today, most of our devices are connected. Our cars are connected. We have smart homes. We have wearables, and then obviously cell phone, Wi-Fi, computers. So that's the premise of like how we looked at creating the technology, which was, well, we're not going to be able to prevent devices from emitting EMFs. And we can't clean the air of EMFs. That's not a thing. It's just not possible, and it would probably interfere with the whole system anyways if it were possible in the first place. So the only thing we can do is actually shield our body straight away from EMF and prevent wireless radiation from reaching our cells and our tissue directly, and especially tissues that have vital organs that are more impacted by wireless radiation. So we looked at how can we protect our genitals, our gut, our heart, our lungs, and our brain specifically. With that premise, we looked at, okay, well, we know how to, we know what we need to create as a solution. How do we create it now? And we started looking at, like, is there anything that blocks wireless radiation out there? Turns out that spacesuits do block wireless radiation inside. And so we looked at how this technology was working, and they're using a physical principle that is very simple, even though it sounds very complicated. It's called electromagnetic shielding. And the principle is going to sound like a mouthful, but I'm going to explain it in more simple terms. But wireless radiation have a wavelength, which is kind of the distance between 2 points between two waves, if you want to look at it this way. And when an electric field and a magnetic field, when coming into contact with a mesh of conductive materials, the electric field cannot penetrate this mesh, and the magnetic field gets diffused. And so let me rephrase this in more simple terms. If you have a fence like the one that I've got behind me, if the size of the hole of the fence is smaller than my head, there's no chance I'm going through this fence right now. And the fence needs to be conductive for it to work, because electromagnetic radiation have these physical electric properties. And so we created a mesh. One simple example of an electromagnetic shielding device that you probably have in your home is your microwave. If you look at the door of your microwave, there are those like tiny holes in it. That's because the rest is, I think they use aluminum most of the time, which is very conductive as well. And it's not just in the door; it's all around in every part of your microwave in order to keep the radiation inside. We use the same principle, except that we integrated it into fabric. And so we use a mesh of silver fibers that is knit in a way that completely blocks or blocks 99.9% of wireless radiation from all consumer devices. So cell phone, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, 4G, 5G, from reaching our bodies. And then we use this fabric to make super comfortable and stylish apparel that cover our most important vital organs.
Amazing. So it's almost like a shield, the technology that you've created with the clothing.
It's kind of like this, yeah, because it's an invisible shield in a sense, because again, it's because of the conductivity of silver that we're able to cancel out wireless radiation as they're becoming in contact with this grid. And it's yeah, and so obviously one very important factor of creating this technology was making sure that it would work in human settings, because it's easy to create something that blocks wireless radiation. Actually, you will have some. It's called aluminum, and it's in your kitchen. Now, creating it into a fabric that is soft and comfortable is harder. And we needed to make sure that it was working in a human setting. So our tests have been done in laboratories where we were testing this on what's called human phantoms, which are mannequins that mimic the physical and chemical properties of a human body. And then we're testing how much radiation is this body absorbing when exposed to wireless radiation with a normal t-shirt, and then how much are they getting when exposed to wireless radiation with a Lambs t-shirt and all of our products. And so that's how we're testing the product, and that's how we came up with the technology.
Amazing. How important, if you could pick one time of the day to wear these. I mean, I wear my hat when I'm working out and when I'm outside, and I know I'm surrounded by Wi-Fi. How important is it to remove as much as possible that exposure at night?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a great question. Night is definitely a big one. We just discussed previously how like poor sleep can impact oxidative stress as well. And what we've found we found a few things. Wearing Lambs increases HRV, which is heart rate variability, and not necessarily it's an indicator of how recovered your body is and how well you're likely to be recovering as well. So how generally people with a higher HRV experience better sleep. So we're seeing that wearing Lambs increases HRV, and we have a ton of our customers reporting better sleep as well when sleeping with Lambs and measuring their sleep with an Oura Ring or a Whoop or an Apple Watch. And so it's kind of compounded then, because you're lowering your oxidative stress from wireless radiation, but you're also getting better sleep, which lowers your oxidative stress as well. So definitely a very important time of day to be wearing it. The rest would depend kind of on your habits and where you are at. If you're working in a forest, you probably need need this a bit less than if you're working in an office building. I know that in my office, I'm exposed to 36 or 40 Wi-Fi signals, and I'm in downtown Santa Monica, so we have a ton of towers all around, and then I've got my cell phone on me all the time because I spend my life on calls and I work with a computer right next to me. So obviously very adamant on wearing it when I'm working, whereas if I'm hiking in nature, which then I usually try to completely disconnect and I leave my phone in the car or it's on airplane mode, then it's obviously less important. But generally, I mean, it's easier for me because I just wear a lens all day, every day, generally. But I would say it just depends on everyone's kind of like lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. So, yeah, and now that people are living more, and especially young people, I moved to LA to work for industry, and the ideal situation is to move to the middle of nowhere in Missouri to avoid all of the EMF, but that's not the world that we live in. So
Yeah,
having
and I'm not sure that's the ideal solution either, right? Like,
right. You would avoid EMF, but you would miss many other things. So.
right.
So yeah, so this is a solution for anybody listening as a way to protect themselves. There are, putting your phone on airplane mode. I always put my MacBook, either turn it off or put it on airplane mode, keep it as far away from myself at night as possible, preferably in a different room, but definitely more than 12 feet away from your head at night, because you're sleeping for, 10 hours, 7 to 10 hours, depending on how long you sleep, and that's that recharge. So HRV, that's really fascinating you've been able to track that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we have a lot of professional athletes that are wearing Lambs for that reason, because of the recovery aspect, which gives you better, like a little bit more edge when training at this type of levels. But HRV is something that is becoming more and more used as a non-invasive measure of how recovered the body is, and generally how well you're doing from a health perspective. So with with HRV, you're kind of able to see before you're going to experience symptoms that you're falling asleep, like your HRV is going down, as like usually a few hours or a day or two before you're coming down with the flu, for instance. There are some fascinating things. And so obviously, when removing a stressor that is immediate and permanent, we're seeing straight away an uptick in HRV, which indicates that the body is in better balance from autonomous nervous response, which is the whole other topic of like how how balanced, how well balanced our body functions are.
Yeah, there's a lot of doctors who have a really poor HRV if you were to test it. And because we're in a stressful situation, especially I'm sure ER doctors and
Oh,
practitioners that are in big hospital settings, terrible HRV. I've seen it on several people. So yeah, it's a huge, huge utility there as
we have
well.
quite a lot of healthcare workers actually wearing a Lambs long sleeve t-shirt under the scrubs as well.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that's brilliant. So amazing. Well, this has been so informative. I'm sure everybody listening will want to know where to find you, where to find Lambs, and be able to connect with you. Thank you for all of that incredible information about EMFs, what we can do to protect ourselves. So let everybody know where they can find you, connect with you.
Yeah, so people can find us online on our website, getlambs.com. It's getlambs.com. And on social media, getlambs on all of our social media. And yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to have this conversation. And I love people like you who are helping the broader world educate on how to be healthier without moving to Missouri or or having to completely change their lives. Like it's a lot of small changes that can have compounded a compounded impact that long term you'll be glad that you made.
Yeah, that compound effect. Amazing. Well, I'll put all the links below in the video, so definitely go check those out in the text and go find Lambs, try them out. I've been wearing it at night, sleeping amazingly, getting deep sleep, sleeping through the night. So loving my experience so far in the last week. But yeah, we will connect with you soon. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amber.